Medellín, Colombia, 1960s. The city was still beautiful back then, before the bullets and the bombs. Pablo Escobar was 12 years old, but he already had the eyes of a man who would never beg. He grew up in a poor barrio called Envigado, where your future was decided the day you were born. Most boys from his street became bus mechanics or fruit vendors. They died old, poor, and forgotten. Pablo wanted something different. He didn't know what yet, but he knew the world owed him a debt, and he intended to collect. His mother, Hemilda, raised 7 children on almost nothing. She washed other people's clothes until her fingers bled. Pablo loved her, but he hated her life. He watched rich kids ride past his neighborhood in clean uniforms, and something cold settled inside him. He wasn't angry at them. He was angry at a system that decided he didn't deserve what they had. That's the difference between a criminal and a revolutionary. A revolutionary wants to change the system. Pablo wanted to beat it. At 14, he was already running small hustles. He sold empty glass bottles. He shined shoes outside the rich people's church on Sundays. But those were games. Real money required real risk. One night, he heard 2 older boys talking about a cemetery on the edge of town. They said the marble tombstones there were worth more than a month's wages. All you needed was a donkey and no conscience. Pablo listened without speaking. That night, he didn't sleep. He lay on his thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. By morning, his first real crime was already planned in his head. He just needed a donkey. The cemetery was called San Vicente. It sat on a hill overlooking Medellín, where the dead rich people had better views than the living poor. Pablo was 15 now, and he had found his donkey. The animal belonged to a drunkard who traded it for 2 bottles of aguardiente. Pablo led the donkey up the hill at midnight, his heart beating hard but his hands steady. He had studied the cemetery for 3 days. He knew when the groundskeeper left which gate had a broken lock and which tombs had the most expensive marble. The richest families buried their dead in white Italian marble, thick as a man's arm. Pablo wasn't stealing from the dead. He was stealing from the living who had put them there. His first night, he pried a small plaque off a tomb that belonged to a coffee plantation owner. The plaque was simple, elegant, worth maybe 20,000 pesos. Pablo loaded it onto the donkey and walked 2 hours to a stone cutter on the other side of the city. The stone cutter asked no questions. He sanded off the name and paid Pablo 15,000 pesos. That was more money than his mother made in 2 months. Pablo looked at the bills in his hand and felt something he had never felt before. Control. The world had rules, but those rules only applied to people who followed them. Over the next 3 months, Pablo robbed 40 tombs. He became efficient. He learned which marble could be removed quietly, which tombs had no nightlights, how to muffle the donkey's hooves with cloth. He never got caught because he never got greedy in one place. He hit a cemetery, then moved to another town. The stonecutters loved him because he sold cheap. Pablo loved them because they asked nothing. But then, one night he opened a tomb that wasn't empty. The tomb belonged to a wealthy merchant who had died 6 months earlier. The family had buried him in a bronze casket with marble so white it glowed in the dark. Pablo pried the outer stone loose and found something he hadn't expected. The inner seal was cracked. The smell hit him first, sweet and rotten like fruit left in the sun too long. He stepped back, but the donkey was already nervous. Pablo's hands shook for the first time. He had stolen from the dead, but he had never seen the dead. That night he almost walked away. Almost. But then he thought about his mother's bleeding fingers. He thought about the rich kids in their uniforms. He tied a rag over his nose and went back in. He removed the marble slab, loaded it onto the donkey, and left the bronze casket exposed to the night air. The next day, the merchant's family found the tomb violated. They screamed at the groundskeeper. The police came, but Pablo was already 2 towns away, selling that marble for 30,000 pesos. That was the moment he learned his second lesson. People will pay you to take their guilt away. The stonecutters didn't want to know where the marble came from. The families didn't want to admit their dead were not sacred. Everyone looked away if the price was right. He kept robbing tombs for another year. He saved every peso. He never spent money on girls or alcohol like the other boys his age. Pablo was building something. He didn't know what yet. But then, one night, the groundskeeper caught him. The groundskeeper was an old man named Ramiro. He carried a shotgun and a lantern. He found Pablo behind the main chapel, loading a slab onto the donkey. Ramiro raised the shotgun and shouted something Pablo couldn't hear over his own heartbeat. Pablo did not run. He did not beg. He looked at Ramiro and said, "How much?" The old man blinked. Pablo repeated himself, "How much?" to look the other way. Ramiro lowered the shotgun slowly. He named a price. Pablo paid it from the money he had in his pocket. Then he went back to work. That was Pablo's third lesson. Every man has a price. Ramiro became his partner. The old man would open the cemetery gate at midnight and close it before dawn. He would tell Pablo which tombs had fresh marble and which families had moved away. In exchange, Pablo paid him twice what the cemetery did. Ramiro started drinking better rum. He bought new boots. He stopped sleeping in the caretaker's shack and got a small house in town. Pablo didn't care about Ramiro's happiness. He cared about efficiency. With Ramiro on the inside, he could rob 5 tombs a night instead of 2. His money grew faster, but the bigger his money grew, the bigger his hunger grew. Marble was good. Marble was safe. But marble had limits. There were only so many tombs, only so many stonecutters. Pablo wanted something bigger. He started looking at the rich neighborhoods not as places to steal from, but as places to enter. He wanted their lives, not just their dead monuments. One night, Ramiro brought him a different kind of offer, a smuggling route. Ramiro had a cousin named Edgar who ran contraband cigarettes across the Ecuador border. Edgar needed young men who could walk cargo through the mountains without asking questions. The pay was 10 times what Pablo made from tombstones. But there was a catch. The border was controlled by a man named Barrera, who took 40% of every shipment. Edgar was tired of paying. He wanted someone to make Barrera disappear. Pablo was 16 years old. He had never killed anyone, but he had already learned that violence was just another tool, like a crowbar or a donkey. He met Barrera one afternoon at a roadside bar. Barrera was fat, loud, and stupid. He had 5 men with him, all armed. Pablo sat at the next table and listened. He learned that Barrera's weakness was women. Every Friday night, Barrera visited a prostitute in a remote house outside town. He went alone. He never told his men where he was going. Pablo waited 3 weeks. He studied the house. He learned which window Barrera used, what time he arrived, how long he stayed. On the 4th Friday, Pablo went to the house early. He climbed through the back window and waited in the dark for 2 hours. When Barrera came in, he was drunk and laughing. Pablo stepped out of the shadows. Barrera opened his mouth to speak. Pablo hit him once with a rock wrapped in cloth. That was all. Barrera fell and did not move. Pablo checked his pulse. Nothing. He dragged the body into the hills and left it in a ravine where the dogs would find it. Then he walked back to Edgar and said, "The border is open." Edgar smiled. Pablo had just crossed a line he would never cross back. The murder changed something in Pablo, not the way you might think. He didn't have nightmares. He didn't feel guilt. What he felt was power. He had removed a problem with one swing of a rock. No gunshot to attract attention. No witness. No body that would ever be found, because the dogs and the rain would erase everything. Pablo realized that killing was just another transaction. You identify the problem. You calculate the cost. You execute, then you move on. Most people cannot do this. Their hearts get in the way. Pablo's heart had been replaced by a calculator a long time ago. Edgar gave him 10,000 pesos for the job, plus a percentage of the cigarette route. Within 3 months, Pablo was making more money than most lawyers in Medellín. He bought his mother a sewing machine. He bought his father a new pair of boots. He told them he was working as a truck driver. They believed him because they wanted to believe him. That's another lesson Pablo learned early. People see what they want to see. His mother saw a good son providing for his family. The police saw a poor kid from Envigado who couldn't possibly be a threat. The rich saw nothing at all. Pablo moved through their world like a ghost. But the cigarette business was small. Pablo wanted more. He started asking questions about a different product, something more profitable than cigarettes, something people would always need. He heard whispers about a man named Alfredo who ran a small cocaine lab in the jungle. Alfredo was nobody, but his product was pure. Pablo drove out to meet him one night in a borrowed truck. He brought a gun and a plan. He did not know yet that this meeting would change Colombia forever. He only knew that tombstones and cigarettes were for beginners. He was ready for the big game. Alfredo's lab was a wooden shack hidden in the trees, 2 hours from the nearest road. The smell of ether and gasoline hung in the air like poison. 3 men worked over metal vats, stirring a white paste that would become cocaine. Alfredo was small, nervous, with yellow teeth and shaking hands. He had been running the lab for 2 years, selling his product to anyone who could pay. He made enough to stay drunk and no more. Pablo looked at the operation and saw something Alfredo could not see: a gold mine run by a fool. Pablo did not offer to buy Alfredo's product. He offered to buy Alfredo, not the man, the lab. He would provide chemicals, protection, and buyers. Alfredo would keep 10% and keep his mouth shut. If he talked, he would end up like Barrera. Alfredo agreed immediately. He was not a brave man. Brave men do not hide in jungle shacks. Pablo took control of the lab that same night. He fired 2 of the workers who looked untrustworthy. He kept the third, a silent man named Carlos who knew chemistry. Then he drove back to Medellín and started looking for buyers. The buyers were everywhere. Rich kids who wanted to feel something. Businessmen who worked 14 hours a day and needed to stay awake. Women who wanted to be thin. Cocaine was not a drug in 1970s Colombia. It was a lifestyle. Pablo understood this before anyone else. He did not sell cocaine as an escape. He sold it as an upgrade. You take this powder and you become better, faster, stronger, richer. The lie worked because Pablo believed it himself. He was faster, he was stronger, he was richer, and he was just getting started. But the police were also starting to notice. The first time the police came close, Pablo was 19 years old. A patrol found a shipment of his cocaine hidden in a truck near the airport. The driver was arrested. Under pressure, he gave Pablo's name. 2 detectives showed up at Pablo's apartment the next morning. They expected a nervous drug dealer who would beg or bribe. Pablo did neither. He invited them in. He offered them coffee. Then he said, "You have 2 choices. You can arrest me, and I will be out in 3 days because I own the judge. Or you can work for me and make 10 times your salary every month." The detectives looked at each other. One of them laughed. The other one did not. That detective's name was Trujillo. He took the deal that same day. Within a year, Trujillo was Pablo's personal liaison to the Medellín Police Department. He warned Pablo about raids. He lost evidence. He arrested competitors. Pablo paid him 50,000 pesos a month. Trujillo bought a house on a hill. His wife got a new car. His children went to private school. He never once looked back. That was Pablo's final lesson from his first crime. The system is not your enemy. The system is a machine, and if you learn how it works, you can put your hand inside and make it do whatever you want. By 20, Pablo Escobar had moved beyond tombstones and cigarettes. He had a cocaine lab, a corrupt police force, and a reputation for solving problems permanently. He was not yet the king of Medellín, but the old kings were already sleeping with one eye open. They could feel something coming, a shadow moving toward them. A boy from Envigado with a donkey and a rock. The tombstone business seems small now. Almost innocent, a teenager stealing marble from the dead to buy his mother a sewing machine. But that first crime was not small. It was a blueprint. Every crime Pablo Escobar committed afterward, the bribes, the bombs, the planes full of cocaine, the thousands of bodies, followed the same pattern he learned in that cemetery. Identify the target. Calculate the risk, remove the obstacle, pay off the witnesses. Never look back. He never forgot Ramiro, the groundskeeper. Years later, when Pablo was worth billions, he sent an envelope to Ramiro's widow. Inside was enough money to buy a small building. There was no note. There didn't need to be. Ramiro had kept his mouth shut. Pablo paid his debts. That was his code. A twisted code, but a code nonetheless. He also never forgot the rock wrapped in cloth. He kept it in a drawer for years, a souvenir, a reminder that you do not need an army to change the world. You need one clear night, one open window, and the willingness to do what others cannot. Pablo Escobar's first crime was not about money. It was about discovering who he really was. Some people spend their whole lives wondering if they are capable of terrible things. Pablo found out at 15. And instead of being horrified, he was relieved. The worst part of himself was also the most useful. He rode that truth all the way to the top of the world. And then, of course, all the way down. But that is another story. For now, remember this. Every empire begins with one small, ugly choice. Pablo Escobar made his among the tombstones.